This one's really interesting. We have another example of occasional voice of reason on Fox News, occasional actual journalist on Fox News, Chris Wallace, calling out another Republican official for their just obvious, blatant, pathetic hypocrisy. This time, the target, the victim, I don't know what you would call them, the mark, is Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott, who said nothing when Donald Trump was president about all of the alleged sexual abuse at migrant shelters when Donald Trump was in office. But now, all of a sudden, that Joe Biden is in office, Greg Abbott is claiming to care about allegations of sexual assault at these migrant detention centers. So let's get right into it. And then after this, I'll remind you something very similar happened with Chris Wallace just a couple of weeks ago. We'll look at that a little bit later. Here's the clip of Chris Wallace and Greg Abbott.
Let's talk about those dire consequences. You made news this week reporting that there are cases of sexual abuse at the Freeman Coliseum in San Antonio, Texas, that houses right now more than 1,600 children. But the head of a nonprofit that provides legal services to immigrants said this: the only reason why Abbott is now acting like he cares about the children in these facilities is for political reasons. Governor, there were thousands of complaints of sexual abuse at migrant shelters during the Trump years. Not to say that what's going on now is right, but we couldn't find one instance of you complaining and calling that out when President Trump was president.
Sure. There are multiple differences between what happened in the Trump administration and what is happening now. First, the Trump administration remained in constant communication with me and with my office and let us know what was going on. Second, I saw reports about exactly what you're talking about and saw that those reports were filed with federal agencies. The one that I talked about earlier this past week were reports that were filed with state agencies, the Texas Health and Human Services Commission and the Department of Protective and Child Services, which is basically Child Protective Services. And so we have a duty to respond to any complaint about child sexual abuse in Texas, as well as to investigate it. And that's exactly what I did to make sure it was addressed.
So Abbott says there are multiple differences when Trump was president. There was really only one difference, which is Trump was president then and Joe Biden is president now. All of the other differences that Greg Abbott cites, they're really distinctions with no practical substantive difference. And if it's true that now Greg Abbott is being notified about this, and when it was Trump, he wasn't being notified, I would look at whether the reason for that is in itself politically motivated. Every time this happens, they always come up with meaningless semantic distinctions that lack any substantive difference. And that's exactly what Greg Abbott did. Now, let me remind you, the last one of these that Chris Wallace did was a couple of weeks ago, and he interviewed Republican Senator Tom Cotton. And Wallace asked Tom Cotton, listen, now you're complaining that with Biden's COVID stimulus, prison inmates received stimulus money. They also got stimulus money during Donald Trump's first COVID stimulus and Donald Trump's second COVID stimulus, and you voted for those. And Tom Cotton came up similarly with a meaningless response that has distinctions that really are of no substantive importance whatsoever. Take a look.
Here is one of your other complaints about the COVID relief bill. Take a look, sir.
Look how crazy some of the Democratic ideas are. I mean, they had a chance on Saturday morning to stop checks from going to prisoners, from going to the Boston bomber, for instance. And on that vote, they declined. Every single Democrat wanted to continue the practice of sending checks to prisoners.
But, Senator, under two previous COVID relief bills that you supported and voted for and that President Trump signed, prisoners also got checks in those bills.
Well, Chris, that was obviously never Congress's intent. The Trump administration, IRS, and Treasury Department did not send checks to prisoners. Liberal advocacy groups sued to try to force that. A liberal judge said they had to. This month was the first time we ever had a simple up or down vote on whether those checks should go to prisoners. And the simple fact is that every Democrat voted to keep sending checks to prisoners. I don't think that's a smart idea. I suspect most Americans don't either.
Again, there is no defense other than to say, Chris, that's right. I'm playing politics. That's the truth. That's the real answer. During COVID stimulus 1 and 2, it wasn't our intent, he says. But this time, Democrats did want prison inmates to get the money. And then he says, this is the first time we had an up or down vote and it passed. Well, that's because you guys controlled the Senate before and you didn't want an up and down vote on it. But the up and down votes would have essentially been the same both times. It's always deflection. It's pointing fingers. And that's really the Trump mantra that a lot of these Republicans have adopted and perfected in some sense. So as far as Chris Wallace goes, good for him. We've talked before. Wallace tries to find, we can all find fault with any cable news talking head if we want to. I get the impression that Chris Wallace's intentions are generally good. That being said, there is the counterpoint that whether Chris is well-intentioned or not, acting in good faith or not, his presence at Fox News provides cover, a sort of smokescreen, for people like Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity, and for Fox News to say, listen, we've got a lot of different things. We have Chris Wallace and we have Tucker Carlson and we have Sean Hannity. I take the position that it doesn't matter. And what I mean by that is Chris Wallace is asking many of the right questions. And sure, he will be used by Fox News for Fox to be able to say, we're fair and balanced. We have news and opinion. We have things that are more critical of the Biden administration, support, whatever. Some of these right wingers will see it. And by math, some fraction might realize, wow, these Republicans are really hypocrites. And Wallace is the exception on Fox. He's not the rule. I get that. But I continue to believe that his presence does more good than harm overall, much like Shepard Smith while he lasted until he ended up just bailing out on Fox News. In terms of Abbott and Cotton and all of these guys, they're dangerous. They're completely amoral, if not immoral. Greg Abbott's Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, you might remember, was the guy who early in the pandemic said, listen, grandma would sacrifice herself for the economy, by which he meant the stock market. So all of these guys have a very similar, I guess we'd call it a lack of a moral compass. Tom Cotton never saw a double standard he could get away from. They're terrible, and any opportunity to possibly expose them for what they are, even if it's coming during the exception to the rule on Fox News with Chris Wallace, I think it's a good thing. If you disagree with me, let me know. If you think the presence of someone like Wallace is a net negative, I'm open to having my mind changed, but you're going to have to change it. Let me know your thoughts, and we'll have more on this and other such Fox News incidents on our Instagram page. You can find us on Instagram at David Pakman Show.